I have set bones and stopped hearts on 3 continents, and I am telling you about the night I learned I knew nothing about courage, because I want it written down somewhere before I forget the exact color of the light. It was the end of October on the Koja Pass, 10,000 feet up where the air is thin enough to make a healthy man stupid, and I was the senior medical officer at the Sarwin Valley Clinic, a walled compound of mudbrick and corrugated tin that the coalition had stood up to treat anyone the war chewed and spat out, soldier or shepherd, ours or theirs. 41 souls were inside those walls when the road went. 33 patients in cots and on the floor, 6 local staff, a Belgian nurse named Vermeer and me. I had been there 9 months. I had grown to believe, in the way a doctor does, that I understood emergencies, that I was, in fact, an expert in them, the calmest hand in any room. I want you to understand how certain I was, so that you understand how completely it left me. The relief element came up the switchbacks late in the afternoon, 3 armored trucks and a dozen men, sent to escort our most fragile cases down to the Valley Hospital before the snow closed the pass for the winter. They were a recovery and security team, lean and bearded and young, the kind of men who move through a doorway like the doorway has personally insulted them. Their chief was a captain named Mauer, 31, jaw like a brick, eyes that did the math on you in half a second and filed the answer. He shook my hand hard enough to make a point, and called me sir in a way that meant the opposite. And riding in the back of the second truck, half asleep against the bulkhead with her chin on her chest, was a gray-haired woman in a plain uniform with no name tape I could read in the dusk, and no insignia I recognized at a glance. I noticed her the way you notice a chair that doesn't match the room. She was older than the rest by 20 years, easily, 60 if she was a day, I thought, though I'd later learn I was wrong about that the way I was wrong about everything that night. Her hair was iron and silver, cut short and practical. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had a face like weathered stone, all flat planes and deep lines, and a stillness to her that I read then as fatigue. An old soldier who'd been put out to a desk and brought along on a milk run because somebody owed somebody a favor. I assumed she was an observer of some kind, an inspector, a staff officer counting cots and writing reports, the sort the field men resent, and the field men were resenting, visibly, right then. "Who's the passenger?" I asked Mauer low, while his men dropped the tailgates. He didn't even glance back. Headquarters sent an observer down with us, wanted eyes on the evacuation. He said observer the way I might say gallstone. "She'll stay with the trucks. We'll have you and the priority cases loaded inside the hour, sir." The woman climbed down on her own without help, slow and deliberate, and stood looking up at the ridgelines that hemmed us in on 3 sides east, north, and the high broken west where the old goat tracks ran. She did not look at the clinic. She looked at the ground, at the gate, at the angles. I thought she was an old woman getting her bearings after a long ride. I know now she was reading the entire battlefield in the time it took me to dislike her. "Ma'am," I said because I'd been raised to it, "there's tea inside if you'd rather not stand in the cold." She turned those flat gray eyes on me. "Thank you, Major." Her voice was low and even, sanded smooth. "I'll stay near the vehicles." And then, after a beat, looking past me at the western tracks again, "How many ways out of this place would you say?" "One road," I said, "the way you came." Something moved behind her eyes, not alarm, just a quiet registering, a tumbler clicking over. "One road," she repeated and nodded slowly and said nothing else. Captain Mauer overheard. He smiled the smile of a man being patient with his grandmother. "We'll manage the tactical picture, ma'am. You just observe." She did not answer him. She walked the inside of the wall. I watched her do it because I had nothing better to do while Vermeer and I sorted the litter cases for loading. The woman moved the length of the compound's perimeter at an unhurried pace, and she touched things as she went: the bar of the main gate, the hinge of the side door by the latrines, the stack of grain sacks against the north wall, the iron ladder bolted to the back of the dispensary that ran up to the flat roof. She paused at each of the clinic's 3 buildings and stood in the doorways a moment, looking in, looking out, the way you check the depth of a river before you crossed it. She crouched once at the western corner where the wall had crumbled to waist height and someone had stacked sandbags badly, and she pushed 2 of them into a better line with the flat of her hand, then left them. She counted the cots through the ward window with a small movement of her lips. She found the place where the water tank's shadow fell and stood in it. I thought, what a strange, fussy old woman. I thought she was nervous and hiding it with busy work. I did not understand that I was watching a master craftsman walk a workshop she had been dropped into blind, finding every tool, every exit, every choke point, every shadow she could move through, building, in 15 quiet minutes, the map she would need. The light was going copper and long. Vermeer brought the woman a tin cup of tea she hadn't asked for, and the woman took it with both hands and a nod that was almost gentle, and Vermeer told me later that she'd said only one thing: keep the children near the back wall, away from the windows when it gets dark. Vermeer had laughed it off. We had no children that night, only a 14-year-old shepherd boy with a shattered femur, and he was near the back wall already, and the woman had no way of knowing the war was about to walk up our one road and put its boot through the gate. It came at last light. The first I knew of it was the sound, not the storybook crack of a single rifle, but the ugly overlapping roar of a coordinated thing, small arms and the deeper cough of a recoilless gun, coming from down the switchbacks where the road bent out of sight behind the eastern shoulder. Mauer's radio lit up. One of his trucks was down there, the lead vehicle that had gone back to scout the descent, and in 11 seconds it stopped being a vehicle and became a column of black smoke standing straight up in the still cold air. The road was cut. We were a clinic full of wounded on a dead-end pass with the only way down on fire, and the mountain above us was suddenly full of men coming down the goat tracks she had looked at and I had not. I will not pretend I behaved well. I shouted for Vermeer. I started dragging cots away from the windows. I did the small, frantic, useful things a doctor does, and underneath all of it I was a child who wanted his mother. Mauer's men were good. I'll give them that forever. They took the wall and the gate and the roof with a speed and economy that was beautiful even to my untrained eye, and for a while the volume of their fire held the tracks. But there were too many coming, and from too many angles, and the recoilless gun down on the road kept the trucks pinned and burning so that no one could reach them and no one could leave. Inside 20 minutes the picture was simple and terrible. The attackers had pushed 2 teams up over the broken western wall, the low place, the badly stacked sandbags, and into the dispensary and the storeroom on the far side of the courtyard. They held a third of the compound. Between them and the ward where 41 of us were crowded was 40 meters of open courtyard swept by their guns, and the only covered route was through the very buildings they now held. Mauer had pulled his surviving men back to the ward and the gate to keep us from being overrun, and that was the right call, and it was also the call that sealed us in. We could not get out. They could not quite get in. And the clinic's old field radio, the one that reached the valley, took a round through the set in the first minutes, so that Vermeer's last transmission, the one they later played me, the one in the title of every report, was a flat, calm, dying sentence. We're overrun, the road is cut, send anyone. And then static. No one was coming. There was no one to come. The weather was turning, and the relief for the relief was 12 hours out at best. And we had perhaps 2 before the men in the dispensary worked out how few we were and came across the courtyard in the dark. I was kneeling on the ward floor with my hands inside a man's abdomen, trying to keep a sergeant named Olufemi from bleeding out where a fragment had opened him. And through the doorway I saw Captain Mauer at the gate, and I saw his face, and I understood that the math behind his eyes had finished, and the answer was bad. That was when the gray-haired woman put down her tea. I saw it through the window. She had been crouched the whole time in the shadow of the water tank exactly where she had stood an hour before, unhurried, while the world ended around her. She set the tin cup down on a stone, square and careful, the way you'd set down something you meant to come back to. She stood. She crossed to Mauer at a walk in that fire, and I could not hear what she said over Olufemi's blood and my own pulse, but I saw it. She said something short. Mauer answered sharp and pointed back toward the trucks, toward the rear, toward stay out of my way. This is real work. He was a brave man telling an old woman to get to safety, and I would have done the same. She listened to all of it with her flat, patient stone face. And then she did a thing I have turned over in my mind 10,000 nights since. She reached out and almost kindly moved the barrel of his rifle 2 inches to the left, off her chest, where it had drifted as he gestured. Just moved it aside like brushing a branch from a trail. And she said one more thing, and she walked past him, not toward the trucks, toward the courtyard, toward the 40 meters of killing ground and the buildings full of armed men, on foot, alone, with her hands empty. I thought she had lost her mind. I thought the altitude or the fear had broken something in her, and she was walking into the guns the way the snowblind walk off cliffs. I half rose, my hands red to the wrist, to shout at someone to stop her. Vermeer's hand on my shoulder pushed me back down to Olufemi. "He'll die if you let go," she said, and she was right, and I stayed, and so I watched the whole of it through a window 40 feet away, framed like a thing on a stage, and that is why I can tell it to you true. The old woman did not run across the courtyard. She moved along the inside of the eastern wall in the deep shadow the water tank threw, in the exact line she had walked an hour before when I thought she was a fussy old fool, and the line put a building between her and the western guns for the first 15 meters, and I understood slowly, stupidly, like a man waking, that she had not been wandering earlier. She had been surveying. She had memorized every shadow in this compound while it was still daylight and quiet, against precisely the chance that one day it would be neither. And now she spent that memory like a rich woman spends money she's had so long she's forgotten the getting of it. Where the shadow ran out she stopped, flat against the wall, and she waited. I did not understand for what until the recoilless gun down on the road fired again, and every head on the western side turned a quarter-inch toward the noise out of pure animal reflex. And in that quarter-second she crossed the gap, 3 long strides, low, and was into the lee of the storeroom, the near building, the one closest to the ward. She had not fired a shot. She did not have a weapon I could see. She had crossed half the courtyard on borrowed shadow and stolen attention, and the men holding the compound did not yet know she existed. I have watched surgeons I revere work a bleed they should not have saved. I have seen a hand move with the kind of certainty that looks, from outside, like slowness, like there is all the time in the world, because every motion is necessary and none is wasted, and the speed lives entirely in the absence of error. That is what I was watching, and I did not have the words for it then. I have them now. I was watching the most disciplined human being I have ever seen do the work she had spent 30 years learning, in the only place on earth it could be done, and she did it the way water finds the low ground. Without drama, without hurry, without a single motion she did not mean. She went in through the storeroom side door, the one with the hinge she had touched, that I had watched her touch, and she went in quiet, and there was a sound from inside that I will not dress up for you. War is not clean, and neither was that. A man had been holding that doorway. He was not holding it anymore. She had not used a gun because a gun is loud, and loud was the one thing she could not afford, while 41 of us depended on the men in the dispensary not knowing she had begun. When she came back into the gap of the side door, she had his rifle in her hands, held like an extension of her arms, and she had become, in the space of 90 seconds, the most dangerous thing on the mountain. And still no one knew. What she did over the next 40 minutes I can give you only in pieces, because I saw it in pieces, through a window, with my hands in a dying man and my heart in my throat. But the pieces fit, and I have spent years fitting them, and this is the shape of it. She cleared the storeroom and the dispensary the way you'd clear a clogged artery, proximal to distal, methodical, never leaving a danger behind her, never rushing the next room before the last was safe. She did not spray fire. I would hear 2 shots, close together and deliberate, and then a long silence, and then two more somewhere else, closer to us. Doubles. Doubles, always spaced, always followed by the quiet of a problem solved rather than the chatter of a problem being argued with. She fired in the entire night, I am told later by the men who counted, a number of rounds you could hold in two hands. Each one meant a thing. There was no waste in her. There was no waste in her at all. And between the rooms, she got people out. This is the part I did not expect and could not have invented. She was not there to win the compound. She had no interest in the compound. She was there to empty it of the living, and so each time she took a room, she did not hold it. She pulled whoever was in it out behind her, toward us, along the shadow lines she'd mapped, and then she went forward again into the next. The storeroom had two of our local staff cowering behind sacks. I saw them suddenly appear at the ward's back door, white and shaking and alive, delivered there by a hand that had reached back into the dark and steered them through 40 meters of war so smoothly they barely knew they'd moved. The dispensary had the boy with the femur. We'd staged him there earlier before, when there had been a safe place. And she came out of the dispensary carrying him against her chest with one arm, the rifle one-handed in the other, walking. And a man on the western wall finally saw her and opened up, and she did not flinch and did not run and did not drop the boy. She turned her body to put herself between him and the gun, took 2 strides into a doorway's cover, set the boy down gentle as a nurse, fired twice, and the gun on the wall stopped. Then she picked the boy back up and brought him to us. She passed the doorway of the ward where I was kneeling, close enough that I could have touched her, and for 1 second her flat gray eyes found mine over the boy's head, and there was nothing in them I had a name for. No fear, no fury, no triumph, no madness, just attention. The total, terrible attention of someone for whom the entire universe had narrowed to the next room and the next breathing body and the geometry between them. She laid the boy on the floor at Vermeer's feet without a word and turned and went back out into it. "Who is she?" I said to no one to the room. It was Olufemi who answered me. The sergeant whose belly I was holding shut, gray as ash, half gone with blood loss, lifted his head off the floor at the sound of her step in the doorway, and his eyes went wide and wet, and he said a word I did not know was a name. "Latchkey," he said. I thought he was delirious. "Latchkey," he said again stronger, and a kind of awful joy came into his ruined face. "It's Latchkey. I know that walk. Oh God, oh thank God." And then he told me in the broken, bleeding scraps of breath I was trying to keep in his body, a thing I have since had confirmed by men who do not confirm things easily. 11 years before, Olufemi had been a younger man on a worse night, one of 9 survivors of an outpost that had been written off, surrounded, given up for lost by the planners with the maps who'd run the math and found it bad, exactly the math I'd seen finish behind Captain Mauer's eyes. No relief column was coming for them. The cost was deemed too high. They were a line item to be regretted. And on the 3rd night, a person none of them had ever seen came in over the wire alone and brought all 9 of them out, one by one, across ground that should have killed them, and did not stay to be thanked, and left behind only a call sign that the 9 of them had said to each other for 11 years like a prayer. The recovery people, the ones whose whole grim trade is going in alone after the people everyone else has crossed off the list. They had a legend, and the legend had a name, and the name was Latchkey, because she was the one who opened the door that was supposed to stay shut forever and walked the condemned back out through it. "She doesn't bring you back to win," Olufemi whispered, gripping my forearm with a strength I didn't think he had left. "She brings you back because nobody else would come. Major, nobody else came." I looked through the doorway at the gray-haired woman I had offered tea and pitied as a fussy old fool. The woman Mauer had ordered to stay with the trucks, the washed-up observer, and I felt something in my chest turn over and break and remake itself, and I have never been the same doctor since. It cost her. I will not lie to you and give you the clean miracle, because she did not give us one and I will not insult her by inventing it. There were 41 of us in those walls when the gate broke. There were 41 bodies she meant to walk back out through the door, and she walked out 40, and she did not get the 41st, and I watched it happen. His name was Karam. He was one of our local staff, a young man who ran the pharmacy and laughed too loud and had a wife in the valley. When she cleared the last contested room, the far corner storeroom, the deepest one, the most dangerous, she found him already gone, caught in the first rush. And there are things even she could not undo, and the stopping of a heart that has already stopped is one of them. I know this because she came back across the courtyard the final time carrying him too, carrying a dead man across open ground under fire because she will not, leave the people she came for, living or dead. And she laid him down inside the ward with the same gentleness she'd laid down the boy. And she knelt beside him 1/2 second, and put 2 fingers to the side of his throat, though she and I both already knew, and then she closed his eyes with her thumb. That was the only time her face changed. Not toward the enemy, not toward the danger, toward the one she had not been able to save. For one breath the stone cracked, and underneath it was a grief so old and so deep, and so practiced that I understood she had carried it before, many times, that she counted her life not in the men she'd dropped, but in the ones she'd had to carry out cold, and that this was the only wound she had. Then she stood, and the stone closed over it, and she went back to work, because there were still living people behind those walls, and the living come first. By the time the last of the attackers broke off the assault and melted back up the goat tracks into the dark, and they did break off, because a compound where your men go into rooms and do not come out, and where 2 precise shots answer every probe becomes, very quickly, a place sane men decide not to die in. The courtyard was hers, and the ward was full of the living she had pulled out of the dark, and the morning's first relief birds were a gray rumor on the eastern horizon at last. 40 out of 41. One rode in, one rode out, no help coming, the math run and found bad by everyone who ran it, and one gray-haired woman the team had told to stay with the trucks had simply declined to accept the answer, and walked in alone and brought back all but one. Here is the part the reports get wrong or leave out, because there is no field for it on a form. When it was over, there was no salute. I have read the accounts that say there was, and I understand why men want there to have been, but I was there and there was not, and the truth is better. Captain Maurer came in off the gate, soot black and shaking with the after-tremor that takes even the best of them, and he stood in the ward doorway and looked at the woman he had ordered to safety, and he did not salute her, because he could not. He had no words and no gesture equal to it, and he knew it. He just stood there, and his jaw worked, and nothing came out, and that silence said more than any salute. And I who had pitied her, I who had offered her tea like a chair that didn't match the room, I did the only thing I had. As she moved toward the back door to bring in the last of the staff she'd staged outside, the 40 living souls she had carried out of the night were lined along both walls of that narrow ward, on cots, and on the floor and leaning on each other. The wounded and the saved, our staff and her recovered. The boy with the broken leg propped up against the back wall exactly where she told Vermeer to keep the children hours before she could have known there would be a child to keep, and not one of them said a word. They simply turned as she passed, all of them, the whole bleeding length of that room, and watched her go by in a silence you could have built a church in. A corridor of the living. The honor a soldier earns when there is no flag and no formation and no commander left standing to give it. Only the people who are still breathing because of you, looking at you, knowing. She walked through them to the door without seeming to notice, because I do not think she did it for that. I do not think she has ever done it for that. And at the door she had to stop, because her hands were full again with someone, and she could not work the latch. So I crossed the room and I opened it for her. I stood aside, and I held the door, and I bowed my head, me, the great calm expert in emergencies, the man who knew everything about courage, and I held the door for her in silence while she carried the last living soul out into the gray and rising light. She paused in the doorway, level with me, close enough that I could see how tired she truly was under the stone, how the iron in her hair had been earned a night like this at a time for 40 years, and she looked at me with those flat gray eyes that had read this whole battlefield while I was deciding I didn't like her. And she said the only thing she said to me directly the entire night. 40, she said, quiet, not proud, almost an apology, the way a person says a number they will be checking against a different number for the rest of their life. 40, I agreed, and my voice broke on it, because I understood by then that to her it would always also be the one. It would always be Karam with her thumb on his eyelids, that this was the arithmetic she lived inside and would die inside. She nodded once, the same slow nod she'd given the ridgelines at dusk. Then she carried the man out, and she did not look back, and somewhere up the pass a door I will never see again closed quietly behind her, and the helicopters came in loud over the eastern shoulder with the sun, and I stood holding an open door in an empty frame and wept like a child for everything I had been sure I understood. I have set bones on 3 continents. I have stopped hearts and started them. I thought I was the calmest hand in any room. I was wrong about her in every way a man can be wrong, and being wrong about her is the truest thing I know. They had told her to stay with the trucks. They had called her a washed-up observer, an old woman, a chair that didn't match the room. And when the road was cut and the radio was dead and the math came back bad and there was no one left to come, she set down her tea and she came. Send anyone, the last call said. She was the anyone. She had always been the anyone. And she walked in alone through the one door everyone else had decided to leave shut, and she brought us home.